Becky Henney with MSU Extension, or Michigan State University Extension.
And I'm Amy Prinz, a program instructor with Michigan State University Extension. And today we're going to talk about squash and the availability of winter and summer squash.
But first, Amy, tell me a little bit about this icon, which is used to be our food guide pyramid, but now we've switched over to the USDA MyPlate. So could you tell me a little bit what it means?
Sure, Becky. The United States Department of Agriculture has recommended with MyPlate that half of our plate be fruits and vegetables. And a wonderful way to get those vegetables on your plate is with squash. Did you know that there's two different types of squash?
Fantastic. What are those two types of squash?
Those squash, Becky, are winter squash and summer squash. And with the winter squash, which we're going to show today on how to cut and actually use it in a recipe, okay, a little bit later, but first let's talk about the different types of squash we have. You might have seen these in your farmer's market or maybe at your local grocery store, and they might look a little difficult, don't they?
Oh, you know what? The reason I avoid these winter squash is because of the tough external rind, and the cutting is so very difficult for me.
I'm going to show you a technique today, Becky,
Fantastic.
that you can take home with you, and you won't be scared of these any longer. So the difference between your summer and winter squash, though, is you can eat the outside of a summer squash. This is a yellow squash. We have a zucchini. I never take the outer coats of these off, okay? But I don't think we want to eat the exterior of the hard squash or the winter squash, do we?
No.
No. Okay. So, Becky, we do have different characteristics in different types of winter squashes that we can choose. This is a butternut squash. Mm-hmm. We do also have a buttercup squash. Mm-hmm. You've seen the acorn squash before.
I have.
Okay. And our summer squash, we do have yellow squash and a zucchini squash. Okay. When we're choosing our squashes at the farmer's market or in the store, we want to look for an exterior that is firm to the touch. We want to look for any dents because we don't want to buy that squash. Because those dents can make the squash not last as long, and we don't want to eat a squash that isn't fresh, correct?
Definitely.
Okay.
So, Amy, tell me, when would I see these potentially in my grocery store? Because if I'm not mistaken, I'm seeing these most of the year.
Correct.
But tell me a little bit about when they're available, maybe in my farmer's market, and when they're most fresh.
Okay. Our summer squash are typically going to be available in your farmer's market, and they'll be fresh in your grocery store anywhere from July through September.
Okay.
Okay. Our winter squash is typically available anytime September through December. But the one lovely thing about winter squash is that they will store up to 3 months, if not longer, if you keep them in a dry, cool area like a cellar from 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit.
Great.
Okay.
One of the resources that you might be able to pull up on your internet, if you have internet availability, if you were to Google the Michigan Availability Guide, it will pop up as a selection for you, and it will give you a reference on the months and time frames that each of our fruits and vegetables are available in the state of Michigan. So, Amy, when I get these squash home, what do I need to do? What's my first step with these squash?
Well, Becky, I say that the first step, anytime you're walking into a kitchen, is washing your hands, okay? And we all know the rule for washing our hands, 20 seconds, in between our fingers, underneath our rings if we have any. Typically, I will remove my rings when I'm cooking.
Now, Amy, the thing with the winter squash, as we obviously talked about, we don't eat the external rind. What is the safety that we need to take into place or consider when we're using these in our kitchens?
Well, Becky, with all fresh fruits and vegetables, we want to make sure that they're washed. Even though we're not eating the exterior of the winter squash, if I were to run my knife through the exterior of the squash into the flesh, and without washing it, there's a possibility that I could bring that bacteria from the outside into the part that I'm eating. So it's a must, and it's that we wash everything that we're eating, whether we're eating the outside of it or not. So what I do, Becky, is I have a handy-dandy fruit and vegetable brush. If you don't have one of these, rubbing vigorously on these hard squashes, okay, under cold, cool running water, will do the same trick also.
Excellent.
Becky, after we wash these, we want to dry these with another single-use towel. Because anytime we're working with something that's wet like that, there's potential for cutting ourselves because it's slippery.
Well, Amy, I think one of the things that you had mentioned earlier was that these winter squash with their hard exterior rind, you said you had a tip for how to cut that.
I do.
Okay.
An easy way, Becky, to make sure that we aren't harming ourselves with our knives. And for those of you that aren't real comfortable using a knife on a hard squash like this, what we're going to do is take a fork and poke some holes in it, just like we would a baked potato, to allow the steam to escape. We don't need a lot of them, but enough of them. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to put this in the microwave from 3 to 5 minutes to soften the outer shell. Okay, Becky, while this is cooking in the microwave and softening for us so that I can show you a technique on how to safely cut a squash, I want to show you different varieties that we have also on the inside. This is a spaghetti squash. This was what your acorn squash is going to look like on the inside. Now, you might think we're going to take these seeds out and throw them away, but we can eat these seeds just like you can with pumpkin seeds.
Really? Mm-hmm. And how would I do that?
Well, you would scoop them out, rinse them off, and get rid of all of that flesh that's attached to the seed. We're going to lay them out in a baking sheet, and we're going to bake them for 350 degrees for maybe 15, 20 minutes until they get a little hard, and enjoy.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Now, I've heard about spaghetti squash. Tell me a little bit about spaghetti squash, because I think that's a different beast all in itself.
It is. Spaghetti squash, you're not going to cube or take off the outer rind. What you're going to do with this, after you cut it like this and you've taken out the insides, and let me show you how to do that real quick. With just a spoon, we can remove the interior. Sometimes I use an ice cream scoop.
Oh.
So we just want to take out the interior. Whoops. Save those seeds if we want. I want to get rid of all that stuff right here. And we can place these on a baking dish. I have done them cut side down with a little bit of water inside the baking dish for 350 degrees for a half hour to 45 minutes, taking them out. You know they're done when you take a fork, and what you do is you're going to string out that spaghetti squash, put it on a plate, and you're going to add marinara sauce or anything else that's healthy, and it's going to take the place of pasta.
Wow. So just another alternative for pasta if you're wanting to get another vegetable in your diet.
That's correct.
Fantastic.
That's correct. Becky, we just pulled this out of the microwave, and now I'm going to cut the rind off, all right?
Okay.
It isn't going to be perfect, but it does help when you do microwave. It softens the edge enough that it's not so scary when we're taking off that outer skin.
And then after we remove the rind, for our recipe, we're going to be cutting this into chunks, correct?
That's correct, because we're going to layer the chunks of squash, chunks of apple, and then put the seasonings on top.
Excellent.
Whoops. Okay, so, and how many cups do we need of the squash, Becky?
We need 2.5 cups of winter squash.
Okay, so now I'm going to cut through my squash. And it's always a good idea for knife safeties and for your finger safeties is to place the flat surface on the cutting board so that we don't slip and roll and slide around.
Sure.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Let me move this one out of the way because we might not need that one. And as you can see, all the seeds are stuck inside too, but we'll use this at a later time. Or if we need the flesh for the recipe, because we need to measure it out.
So Amy, as we're preparing this recipe, tell me a little bit about the health benefits of this recipe.
Well, It's full of vitamin A. 1/2 cup of dark orange squash is 100% of your daily recommended vitamin A.
Fantastic. You know, and what this recipe will give us is 6 servings. How many servings of vegetables and fruits should somebody, an adult, try to get in their diet every day?
5 a day is what's recommended, or 2.5 cups of vegetables every day.
Okay. And so, and that could vary depending on physical activity and any kind of
Correct.
dietary needs
That's
that somebody
correct.
might have.
Correct. The recommendations that I just gave you are based on 2,000 calories. You might be more, you might be less. At my age, I'm a little less than 2,000 calories, but I still like to eat my fruits and vegetables.
Oh, fantastic.
So squash is a major part of my diet. Also, they've recommended that a variety of colors in your vegetables on a weekly basis is recommended also. So I'm going to go ahead and start measuring out our squash, and we needed 2.5 cups, you said.
Yes, 2.5 cups.
So, and we want to layer these. Did it say to start with the apples or the squash first?
It said to actually start with the squash and
Okay.
end with the apples on top.
Okay, so there's 1 cup.
And we don't have to use the butternut squash for this recipe. We could also use acorn squash or Hubbard squash, different varieties of squash, and it may be based on somebody's preference if they like one squash over another.
That is correct. That is correct. You don't have to use the butternut squash on this one. So, okay, we have our squash prepared. I am not going to waste this. Okay? I'm going to store this for a later recipe that I might use. Typically, we're going to store this no more than 3 to 5 days in the refrigerator. We want to keep this covered, and I could use it for another recipe or another meal.
Okay. Now, you bring up storage, an excellent point. How long could our winter squash, if we bring it home from the farmer's market or the grocery store, how long could I keep that at my home?
You can keep that up to 3 months, if not longer, as long as it stays hard and there aren't any dents in it or mold on it. It will stay 3 months or longer if you keep it in a cool, dry place, anywhere from 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit.
So you're saying that about winter squash, but that's going to be a little bit different criteria for the summer squash, correct?
That's correct. I would use these as soon as they are picked or as soon as you bring them home. Okay?
Excellent.
So, now the next thing that we want to do is that we want to add apples. How many cups of apples do we need, Becky?
The recipe calls for 1.5 cups of apples, and we
Correct.
can use a Macintosh or maybe a Granny Smith.
I would say whatever your preference is on that and the availability of them also. But with the apple, just like with any other fresh fruits and vegetables, we want to wash these first also.
Another good point.
So I'm going to take this to the sink, and with my scrub brush that I specifically use just for vegetables,
Or fruits.
or fruits, thank you, yes. And I'm going to make sure that the entire surface is clean. Okay. And with a single-use towel, we can dry that. Or sometimes I air dry them also, okay, on top of a towel. So, I never remove the skin, Becky.
You know, even if I'm making an apple pie, apple cobbler, anything, I always leave the skin on.
Correct. I do also, because the benefits are what?
Fiber.
Fiber, actually, yes. So I am going to leave the skin on, and because I'm leaving the skin on, and I only want to remove the core, I'm going to use one of these handy-dandy tools. Okay.
Now, Amy, if I don't have one of those at home, can I use just a regular knife
You
to cut it
certainly
up?
can. You certainly can. And the way I do it is I make a square. With my knife tipped down, I'm going to come along like this and cut right around the core, keeping my fingers back like that. And then I have the core that I can discard.
Excellent.
All right. And then at this point, what we want to do is just dice or chop up our vegetable or our apple that we're going to use. So how many cups do we need, Becky?
1.5 cups of apples
1.5
will be
cup
added
of
to our
apples.
2.5 cups of winter squash.
Okay.
Well, layered.
Layered, okay. Well, we can layer them with our fingers, I think, when we get them in there. I don't think that it has to be exact, you know. So we have 1.5 cup of apples in there. And you know what, Becky? I'm going to add these in because there's
They're
just
right
a
there?
couple in. They're right there, and I don't like to waste. Okay.
And Amy, I have made this recipe before, and I actually added what I thought was going to meet the needs of my taste buds. And
Correct.
so if I wanted a little more apple taste, I could definitely add a few more apples. Or with the squash, I could add a little
And
more
that's
squash.
the beauty of making food at home, isn't it, Becky?
Yes, it
is
is.
that we can do it to our taste. So, okay, we need seasonings, and it recommends nutmeg and cinnamon.
Yes.
And how much nutmeg do they want me to put in there, Becky?
1/2 a teaspoon of nutmeg and 1 teaspoon of cinnamon.
Okay, so I have a 1/2 teaspoon, and I'm just going to shake that around. Okay. Set that aside. And 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. Okay. And it's a level teaspoon. I did shake it up. Now, does it recommend that we mix this together, or just to do it on the top?
It actually tells us to sprinkle it right over the top.
Right over the top, okay. All right, we will do that. And then we're ready to pop it in the oven.
Yeah.
Correct.
And the nice thing is with this, it is very easy to put together, very simple ingredients, and something that can easily be assembled very quickly. And what we'll do after we do this is cover it with aluminum foil.
Okay.
And just for ease of demonstration, what we have done, we'll pop that in the oven,
Okay.
and then we already have one prepared. And voila.
And voila.
And the USDA Recipe Finder, the United States Department of Agriculture, has a recipe finder that you can access online. And if you go to that website, you'll be able to type in any ingredient that you have on hand to see what kind of recipes are available to you. And with that, we did enter the recipe finder and found this recipe, and actually the cost for this recipe is very minimal, and it tells us that this is in the average range of about $1.55 per recipe, so about 26 cents per serving. So there's 6 servings that are actually going to come out of this recipe.
And it's nutritious for you, too.
Yes, very beneficial to us. So the Michigan Fresh website gives us this information using our fact sheets. The Michigan Fresh fact sheets are available to you online at the website that you will see on your screen. And these fact sheets will give you storage and preservation ideas, tips, tricks, and information on how you can access those in your local farmer's market or grocery store.
Thank you, Becky.